Marissa Hale had never believed in curses until the morning she found a small brown package on her doorstep, addressed to her in a stranger's trembling handwriting. Inside was a Labubu doll with glassy black eyes and a grin too wide to be harmless. By nightfall, her neighbor Evan Cross would swear he saw it standing in her window, even though Marissa had been asleep, and by morning she would discover it wasn't the only one. The package sat on my doorstep when I came home from work, small enough to hold in one hand, light enough that I almost thought it was empty. I didn't remember ordering anything, but my name was written on the top in thick, black ink, the letters uneven, almost shaky. Like whoever wrote it was in a rush, or afraid the paper was wrapped messily, the tape barely holding together in some spots, as if it had been handled too many times. I turned it over in my hands, wondering if it was some kind of mistake, but there was no return address, just my name, and nothing else. Curiosity got the better of me. I tore through the wrapping and found a plain cardboard box inside. No labels, no branding, just old, rough cardboard with faint water stains along the edges. My fingers hesitated on the flaps before I opened them. Inside, nestled in crumpled yellow tissue paper, was a Labubu doll. I'd seen them online before, raw little creatures with oversized eyes, pointed ears and strange human-like teeth poking out from their wide grins. But this one felt different. Its glassy black eyes caught the light in a way that made them look wet, almost alive. The grin was sharp, too sharp as if it was mocking me. It was oddly warm to the touch when I picked it up, like it had been sitting in sunlight for hours, though the box was cold. Its fur was soft but slightly matted, and a faint smell clung to it, something between old wood and damp fabric, the kind of scent you find in a locked attic. I set it on the shelf above my desk, telling myself it was just a doll, a strange gift from someone who didn't leave their name. But even as I walked away, I felt its eyes on me. That wasn't unusual, I told myself. Many dolls are made to look like they're watching. Still, there was something heavier in its stare, something that felt aware. That night I tried to sleep, but the air in my bedroom felt thick, as though the walls had inched closer. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was too complete, like the world outside had stopped. I kept shifting under the blanket, unable to settle. My gaze drifted to the dark outline of the shelf, just visible from where I lay. I couldn't see the doll's face from that angle, but I knew exactly where it was. At some point, I must have dozed off. A faint noise pulled me back, soft, steady, and coming from somewhere near my bed. It took me a moment to place it, scratching. The sound was delicate, like fingernails dragging slowly against a hard surface. My skin prickled. I sat up, my heart beating faster, scanning the shadows in my room. The sound stopped the moment I turned on the lamp. My eyes darted to the shelf. The space where the Labubu had been was empty. A cold weight dropped into my stomach. I turned my head slowly toward the sound's origin, and my breath caught. It was sitting at the edge of my bed. The doll's legs dangled over the side, its head tilted slightly, as if it had been waiting for me to notice. The grin looked wider now, stretched to the very edges of its face. The glassy eyes seemed deeper, like tiny pools of black water, reflecting my own pale, startled face back at me. I wanted to move, to grab it and throw it as far as I could, but my body felt frozen. My heart thudded so hard it hurt, each beat echoing in my ears. Slowly, without a sound, I reached for the lamp switch again. The moment the light flicked off, the air felt colder, the darkness heavier. When I turned the light back on, the doll was gone. Only later, as I lay trembling in bed, did I realize something else. There were faint indentations in the blanket where it had been sitting. Small but deep, like someone much heavier than a toy had pressed down on the fabric. I woke the next morning with the uneasy thought that maybe I had dreamed the whole thing. It was easier to believe that than to accept the idea of a toy moving on its own. Still, when I looked over at the shelf, the Labubu was back in its place, sitting exactly where I had first put it. Its grin was as fixed as ever, but the light from the window made its glossy black eyes seem deeper, almost liquid, as though something behind them shifted when I moved. I told myself to stop staring at it, to get on with my day, but each time I passed the room, my eyes found it again. That's when I began to notice the shadows. At first, it was a simple, nagging feeling that something was off. The morning sun poured in from the left, so its shadow should have fallen neatly across the desk, but the Labubu's shadow didn't look quite right. It was longer, thinner, the arms oddly stretched out, as though it were reaching for something. I stepped closer to study it, and my stomach tightened. The shadow's arms were moving, very slightly, swaying back and forth like branches in a breeze. Even though the doll sat completely still, I backed away, telling myself I must be imagining it. My mind was probably just filling in the blanks, the way you sometimes see shapes in clouds. Later, when I walked past again, the shadow had changed. It looked taller now, its head stretched upward. So far it brushed against the corner of the ceiling. I stood in the doorway, frozen. For a moment, the shadow seemed to tilt, angling its head toward me in a way the doll wasn't. My pulse quickened, and I stepped back into the hall. The rest of the day I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. No matter where I went in the apartment, I had the sense that there were eyes on me from just out of sight. I avoided the room entirely, only passing by quickly when I needed to. But by late afternoon, curiosity won out. I peeked inside. The sunlight had shifted, now casting the shadow across the opposite wall. Only, it wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was darker than the rest of the room, almost solid, with faint lines where its fingers curled and uncurled slowly. I watched in stunned silence as the arm of the shadow bent in a way no real arm could, stretching until the fingertips brushed the floor. My throat felt tight. That night the dream came. I was standing in my apartment, only it was darker than night, the air so heavy I could barely breathe. The Labubu sat on the shelf, but its shadow moved freely across the walls, crawling upward, its limbs elongating until they filled every corner of the ceiling. I couldn't move. The shadow leaned toward me, its head stretching impossibly long, and though it had no mouth, I felt a low hum vibrating through the walls, seeping into my bones. I woke, gasping. My sheets tangled around me, my skin damp with sweat. The clock said 3:12 a.m. The room was silent, but when I sat up, my eyes caught a faint smudge on the mirror across from the bed. I got up slowly, every instinct screaming for me not to look, but I couldn't stop myself. Across the glass were several dark fingerprints. Long, thin, with sharp pointed tips as if something had pressed its hands there and dragged them downward. The prints were faintly wet, leaving thin trails that ended just above the floor. I turned toward the shelf. The doll was there, but it wasn't sitting. It was standing upright, balanced perfectly still, its shadow stretched all the way to the floor. By the third day, the air in my apartment felt heavier, as though something invisible had settled into every corner. It wasn't just the unsettling shadow anymore. There was a smell now, faint at first, but growing stronger with every passing hour. It was strange, layered, like damp soil mixed with something sweet, almost sickly, the kind of scent that lingers in old basements or rotting flower arrangements. At first I assumed maybe food had gone bad somewhere, so I tore the kitchen apart. I checked the fridge, the pantry, the trash. Nothing. The smell wasn't coming from there. I searched the bathroom, the hallway closet, even under the bed, but it was useless. The strange odors seemed to follow me, drifting closer no matter where I went. When I finally walked into the bedroom, I realized it was strongest near the shelf. My stomach tightened. The Labubu sat in its usual place, its wide, toothy grin fixed as ever. The light from the window caught on its eyes, and for a moment I swore I saw something shift inside them, just a faint ripple, like movement beneath dark water. I stepped closer, my breath shallow. The doll's fur didn't look the same as it had when it first arrived. It was darker now, the fibers matted together in clumps, as if it had been damp for too long. I leaned in, and that's when I noticed tiny, dark specks wriggling near the edges of its pointed ears. My skin crawled. They looked like tiny insects, their bodies glistening as they moved deeper into the fur. My first instinct was to get rid of it immediately. I grabbed a trash bag from the kitchen, the plastic crackling in my hands. I didn't want to touch the thing directly, so I pulled the bag open wide and reached for it. But the second my fingers brushed against its body, the world around me changed. It was like being plunged into a dream, though I was wide awake. The room around me dissolved, replaced by a dim red-lit space that pulsed like it was alive. The air was hot and thick, carrying that same sickly sweet smell but stronger, almost choking. All around me, stretching into the shadows, were shelves, dozens of them lined with identical Labubu dolls. Each one stared straight at me, their glassy eyes reflecting the red light, their grins impossibly wide. I couldn't move. My legs felt locked in place, my chest tight as though invisible hands were pressing against it. Somewhere in the distance I heard a faint scratching sound, growing louder, closer. One by one, the dolls' heads began to tilt, perfectly synchronized, until they were all leaning toward me. My skin prickled as their shadows stretched across the walls, merging into a single, towering figure that began to crawl along the ceiling. Then, just as quickly as it started, it was gone. I was back in my apartment, standing in front of the shelf, my fingers trembling. The trash bag had slipped from my hands. I looked down, expecting to see the doll still sitting there, but it was gone. The shelf was empty. I spun around, scanning the room, my pulse pounding. The bed, the floor, the desk, nothing. The apartment was too quiet. That's when I noticed the trash bag lying crumpled on the floor. Something small and pale sat inside it. I crouched down, hesitating before pulling the bag open. My throat went dry. It wasn't the doll. It was a tooth, small, human-shaped, and covered in bits of dirt. The root was still intact, a jagged curve where it had once been embedded. I dropped the bag instantly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The smell was stronger now, filling the room until it made my eyes water. Somewhere deep in the walls, or maybe inside my own head, I thought I heard it, the faint hum I'd heard in my dream. Low and steady, like something alive breathing just out of sight. That night, the hum began. It was faint at first, barely more than a vibration in the back of my skull, like the quiet thrum of distant machinery. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the refrigerator or the pipes. But the sound didn't come from anywhere in the room, it came from inside my head. It didn't stop when I covered my ears. It didn't change when I moved to another room. It was with me, steady and patient. As the hours passed, the hum shifted into something more complex. It began to rise and fall, forming patterns, almost like a tune on off-key lullaby I didn't recognize. Beneath the melody were whispers. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was urgent, insistent, pressing against my thoughts until they didn't feel entirely like my own anymore. I didn't see the Labubu at first. In fact, I had convinced myself it might be gone for good after it vanished from the shelf. But around midnight, I heard something soft in the hallway closet. Not movement exactly, more like the sound of damp fabric being pressed together. My skin prickled as I slowly reached for the door. When I opened it, the smell hit me first. That same sweet, rotting scent, heavy and cloying, thick enough that I had to breathe through my mouth. Then my eyes adjusted to the dark. The Labubu was sitting on a pile of my clothes, right in the center, its legs splayed out, its tiny clawed hands resting on its knees. Its fur was wet, as if it had just come in from the rain, though the night outside was dry and clear. Droplets clung to its face and teeth, catching the dim light in tiny glints. The whispers in my head grew louder the moment I saw it, pressing against me like water filling a sinking ship. My thoughts blurred. My balance faltered. I felt my own heartbeat thudding in my throat, too loud, too fast. The doll's eyes didn't move, but they pulled at me all the same, drawing me in like a current. My nose began to bleed without warning, a warm trickle running down to my lips. I stumbled backward, my legs shaking under me. Something in the air felt heavier now, thicker, almost alive. I glanced down and saw lines carved into the wooden floor beneath the doll. It was a crude image, gouged deep into the boards as though scratched there by something sharp. An open mouth, wide, jagged teeth filling the space inside. The more I stared, the more it seemed to change shape, the teeth lengthening, bending inward, like it was ready to swallow whatever looked too long. I blinked and took another step back, but when I lifted my gaze, the Labubu was no longer sitting. It was leaning forward now, hands pressed into the floor, the tip of its head angled directly toward me. The wetness in its fur dripped onto the wood in slow, deliberate drops. The whispers became unbearable. They weren't outside thoughts anymore, they were threading into my own, speaking through the gaps in my mind, slipping between the words I used to think. I wanted to scream, to do anything to break the connection, but my body didn't obey. For a moment, I thought I saw something in the space between us, not air, not light, but a thin, black thread connecting my chest to the doll's. It pulsed faintly, almost in rhythm with the hum, tightening each time I breathed. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the connection snapped. My body jolted. The whispers went silent. The closet was empty, but the carved mouth was still there, gaping up from the floor, the gouges fresh and deep enough to catch my fingertip when I traced them. The wood around it was damp. My fingertip came away dark, wet, and smelling faintly of earth. I woke on the living room floor, the carpet rough against my cheek, my body stiff as if I'd been lying there for hours. I couldn't remember falling asleep. I couldn't even remember deciding to leave the bedroom. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the normal kind, but an emptiness so complete it felt like sound had been scraped out of the air. I couldn't hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock, or even the muffled noise of traffic outside. It was as though the world had been put on pause. When I tried to move, I realized the light coming in through the windows wasn't right. It was bright, but it had no warmth, a pale white glow that made the colors in the room look washed out. My skin looked gray in it. My phone lay on the coffee table. I grabbed it, desperate for a sense of normalcy, but it was dead. Not just out of battery, the screen stayed black even when I held the power button down. Then I glanced toward the wall clock and felt a chill run through me. The hands were frozen at 3:17 a.m., even though the light outside suggested morning. I stared for a moment, my stomach sinking as I realized the second hand wasn't moving at all. The Labubu was in the center of the room. It wasn't sitting on the floor casually like before. It was standing upright, perfectly balanced, its tiny feet planted firmly on the carpet. The eyes were different now. They weren't glossy glass anymore. They were wet, alive. The dark centers seemed to pulse faintly, as though there was movement deep inside them. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't respond. My arms stayed at my sides, my legs stiff. A pressure began to build in my chest, as if an invisible weight was pressing down on me, pushing the air out of my lungs. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, but even that sound felt muffled. The Labubu tilted its head slowly, the motion unnatural and jerky, as though it was adjusting itself to get a better look at me. That sickly sweet smell filled the room again, heavy enough that I thought I might vomit, but I couldn't even open my mouth. Then the thoughts began. They weren't my own. They came in flashes, images of dark rooms lined with shelves, the same ones I had seen before, the same countless dolls staring down from every direction. Only this time, I wasn't standing among them. I was inside one of them. I could see out through the glassy eyes. I could feel the rigid stillness of a body that didn't belong to me. My vision blurred, the walls of my apartment warping at the edges. The Labubu was closer now, though I hadn't seen it move. Its face filled my field of view, the grin stretched far wider than seemed possible, the teeth uneven and sharp. The black of its pupils widened until they filled its entire eyes, swallowing the faint reflections of light. In the darkness inside them, I saw the shadow again, taller than before, crouched just behind me, its limbs bent at impossible angles, its head stretched down until it hovered above my shoulder, and though it had no face, I could feel it studying me. The pressure on my chest grew unbearable, my vision fading to gray. Just before the last bit of light disappeared, I felt movement on my sternum, something small and light climbing up. It was the Labubu. It stood on my chest, its tiny hands pressing against my collarbone, its face inches from mine. Its mouth moved, but the sound that came out wasn't a whisper, it was my own voice, speaking my own name in a slow, deliberate tone. The weight on me vanished, and I gasped for air, but the room around me was empty. The clock still read 3:17 a.m., the light outside hadn't changed, and when I looked down at my chest, there was a fresh carving in my skin, not deep, but clear enough to read. It was a single word: welcome.